And thank you very much, Drake, for coming on to educate me, for one, on some of the things that are going on with conference realignment, because no matter who you are, which conference you're in, it's still math, and not just money. By that, I mean also there's so many seats at the table for all these conferences. So just to get right into it, trying to figure out how Florida State is impacted by the Big 12, I don't think they're going to end up there, but the teams that they're trying to get at the Big 12 could change some things. So first off, if you would just explain to people what you know and or have heard about the Washington State, Oregon State stuff, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, first things first, Brian, a lot of times the talking heads, myself included, will get so deep into a topic that we forget that so many are tuning in for the first time. They have to understand the basic blocks of how we got where we are now. And that goes back to even well before the Pac-12 fell apart. You could talk about the catalyst of Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 to go to the SEC. And you could go way, way back and talk about Nebraska to the Big 10 or Texas A&M to the SEC. And then a huge round of realignment there. And then you go to private equity, as that's become a thing for the big. There are just so many things that we got to talk about here. If we're going to dumb it down and simplify it, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving to the SEC, it set a precedent to other schools across the country. Hey, our worth is something our conference should represent. Florida State's in that boat right now. They're not getting enough money from the ACC. They're $20 million behind teams in the Big Ten and the SEC, and they don't deserve to be. They can't have the same price tag as Boston College. They can't. It doesn't make any sense. So with schools like that on the exit and on the move, what happened to Washington State and Oregon State is they got left behind for X, Y, and Z reasons. Like Stanford and Cal picked up to the ACC. It made a little bit more convenient sense for that conference. They wanted the whole Directors Cup thing. Oh, we got the swimming champions. Look at our rowing team now in the conference. And why Washington State and Oregon State got left off has a little bit more to do with their history. Two football programs that aren't very good long term, but two football programs that do give you this. Viewership. Washington State has better viewership than any team that the Big 12 added from the Pac-12 sans Colorado in 2023. The only reason being Deion Sanders. Everybody would point and watch those games. So Washington State has a very good footprint, not just in Pullman, which is effectively Idaho and a super small town of Washington, but more so in Seattle, more so with a large alumni base. I get it. It's one flag at College game day, but that flag represents a whole lot of stuff at the university. And then from Oregon State's standpoint, they've shown in the last 5 years, specifically Jonathan Smith, who's now at Washington State or Michigan State, is a great example that they're willing to invest in the right coaches, willing to invest in the right from the NIL, the facilities to win. They've been a competitive football program the last couple of years, beat the brakes off of a dilapidated Utah team last season because Oregon State has turned the page and become a legitimate athletic department. And so with that, those two schools have some sort of value, maybe more so than we thought last summer. And the rumor is ESPN has come in and said, look, we will sanction the move for Washington State and Oregon State, two properties that we see valuable to go to the Big 12 and have a home. The one thing to give to everybody who's at the water cooler, this likely won't happen until 2026. Reason being, due to the Pac-12 leftover, the assets there, Oregon State, Washington State would have to forfeit those if they move before early August of 2026. The only real way around that is ESPN says, hey, who cares? We have more money anyway. We need you in the Big 12 for us to have a long-term play to give you more security. And if that happens, wouldn't be shocked. And the other big thing, a scheduling agreement that puts those two schools quasi in the Big 12 the next 2 years and then full-time members 3 years from now.
That's a lot of information, and thank you.
Deep breath.
Basically, I'm not a big ESPN guy for a lot of reasons, but that's all. I mean, they're always looking to make money. They are a for-profit institution, but if they're going to help those two schools in any way, thumbs up for me. That's kind of cool. Ward only knows they got hosed in the whole Pac-12 thing. I mean, they got hosed. So good for them. I don't have any allegiance to them, but I don't like to see kids get left in the cold either. And like when Oregon State played Notre Dame in that bowl game, everybody that was good had left. That team was a skeleton crew. That was bad. So that's good. Here's the reason I brought this question up to Drake in the first place. Look, man, if they come in and they get, let's say they sign in 26, that changes things. I still don't think that Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, some of those teams, whoever you want to say, Clemson, would be apt to go to the Big 12. I still, until otherwise proven, I don't think that's where they're going to go. But they're also, if they have that makes it more interesting. Because you talked about on your show that I watched, Louisville is really interesting.
Yep.
Like they're never going to get let into the SEC. I grew up not that far from there, and the hate between Louisville and Kentucky is a thing.
Yeah.
And like Kentucky people do not want them in the SEC. The ACC is falling apart, and to my knowledge, the Big Ten's not going to take them. Well, that kind of narrows it down.
Yeah.
And then you brought it up. If they go, that's a common opponent that Florida State's had, rivalries with. They've had, obviously, their basketball program is good. This just in Big 12 basketball is dope. That's a big deal. I could see that. That's interesting. And NC State, who's had some basketball history, they got a pretty sustainable football program. Another team that has quote unquote likeness with Florida State. They played each other forever. A lot of really great games, to be honest. You start looking at this, I'm sure that Florida State's looking at it like the Washington State road trip as a thumbs down, but like there is nothing normal. You already got Cal and Stanford in the league. Yeah. So my question to you is very simple. If they were to make a play for Florida State and all this, they'd have to get some of them involved, no doubt. But any idea on the number, regardless of Florida State, that the Big 12 wants to get to, or is that even a thing yet?
I'm not sure if Brett Yormark has a number that what he has said, and this rhetoric is true. There's a lot of coach speak or commissioner speak that comes out of a Yormark or a Jim Phillips or a Petiti or a Sankey. When Yormark says we'll go to the number that makes the most sense, he means that. If you get to 20 with the right 4 teams, all right, we're good. Where the SEC sits right now with 6, hey, we have the right 16 teams. We're good. We're okay for this for the time being. At least that's what Sankey says. For Yormark, get to 24. Bill Connolly of ESPN says it's 32. That's the right number for the Big 12. And I don't believe that 32 is the case. You're way overloaded at that point, right? What I do believe is that if you are Wake Forest or Boston College or Syracuse, count your days. Count your days as being a program in a legitimate conference, as schools like Louisville and Virginia Tech at NC State and Pitt look elsewhere. Now, can the Big 12 land Florida State and Clemson? There's one way, the only way, money, dollar signs, and likely temporary dollar signs. What that would mean is the Big 10 of the SEC says, hey, we have to hold off the next 2 to 5 years. We're going to hold off till 2030, till another TV contract rotation comes around. And Clemson and Florida State say, hey, wait a second, the Big 12 is going to offer us $40 million, $50 million a year, more than the ACC. A lot of money. Now, the problem with that is you're weighting it. You're giving those schools more than every other Big 12 school. And you go, well, how is that legal? The way you do it, private equity. Brett Yormark's explored private equity recently, which would be, hey, Allstate, come invest millions, billions of dollars in our conference. Right. We become the All-State 12. We use your branding, your stake in this league. With your stake in this league, we've got enough money to pay those 2 schools to play for us. And if that money makes sense, money makes the world go round.
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, to answer money, you could throw that word at a lot of questions in society without even knowing what the question is. That makes me want to hurl. But we both know, Drake, especially with these people, they don't care. Like the NCAA and stuff, I have no love for them. They don't care. But we'll get into more of that here in just a second on this crossover between Locked On Seminoles and Locked On Big 12. I'm going to kind of go into a little bit more of what I think Florida State. I want your take to see if you agree with me on Florida State and where they're going. And if that in reverse impacts what's going on with, not just the Big 12, but the SEC. I got some questions there because some of the fans for Florida State, believe it or not, would rather the Noles join the Big 10, which surprised me. I did a show about it not that long ago, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Just 1 second here. All right, back on the show, one of the things that I really like to do is get into Florida State, going to the conference stuff. So everybody check that out here in a second on Locked On Seminoles and this crossover with Big 12. Have you downloaded the Game Time app yet? It is your opportunity to get personalized seats. You can view them right from the app at a couple of clicks. Pick on Florida State game, Atlanta Braves, you want to go to a concert, take your wife to a play, whatever it might be. You could have opportunities with last-minute deals and save up 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports and everything else that you can possibly imagine. They also have zone deals on the app that you can check out. Save with even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats for you. Something else is cool, and this drives me nuts in general with society. You look at something and it shows the price and you get to the back end to pay. It's not the price. At Game Time, they have all-in pricing that makes it a lot better. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, my friend, this is the fun stuff for me. If you look at Florida State, and I don't know their preference, I'm not saying that I'm sitting in the president's office, but the Big Ten wants to, quote unquote, expand their footprint. I'm sure you've heard that term more times than you can throw it out. What do you think with Florida? I just want your take, and then I'm going to kind of go into what some of the fans told me. Do you think that it's a mistake? Because culturally, Florida State does not fit the Big Ten at all.
Yeah, it is. The AAU status, we want you to be a nerd school and a powerhouse, right. And Nebraska not being AAU being an issue for the Big Ten makes that issue one that's fairly prominent. And the SEC and Greg Sankey have been clear, at least publicly, that they want to hold where they are, sit on it. They're not interested. Brett McMurphy reported neither the SEC or the Big Ten are likely to pursue Florida State as a candidate. Immediately, people started pointing and laughing and saying, well, that's because Florida State doesn't play nice. That's because they want to come in and be the big dog. They don't want to negotiate. They think that they are worth more than they actually are. And I'm not sure if that truly is the case. Florida State is one of those programs, and there are only about a dozen of them in the country that could suck for 5-10 years and still bring expansion value. Here's an example. 15 years ago, would you rather have Virginia Tech or Clemson if you were going to add a team to your conference? The answer is Virginia Tech. At that point in time, this is 2008, 2009, Clemson has less football revenue on average than Bowling Green. They sucked. And when they sucked, nobody really wanted them. Nobody really cared. Then you go to that Orange Bowl, and Dabo Swinney picks up speed, college football playoffs and championships. A decade of winning will make anyone a Clemson. But I can promise you this, a decade of losing will turn Clemson right back into Virginia Tech. That is not the case for Florida State. They can go 10 tough years, the same as a Texas, the same as virtually an Oklahoma or an Auburn or an LSU. They can go 10 years and still be valuable. With that in mind, they bring enough for the SEC or the Big Ten to at least get something out of them. The reason I believe that Florida State fans would want to be in the Big Ten is because, let's be honest with ourselves, the SEC is a different beast. Texas walked in and had to give up the Longhorn Network and immediately became the fake UT. Tennessee got the UT, and horns down became the official symbol of the conference. If Florida State walks in tomorrow, you're going to get bullied on your way. You can't be the big dog. They don't want you to be. You're going to put up with the LSUs, the Auburns, the Alabamas. In the Big Ten, Florida State comes in day one and already has respect because they would be automatically a top 3 brand in that league, and they would not be that in the SEC.
I think that LSU, Alabama, Georgia are the 3 tradition-rich SEC programs, just from dealing with all their fans.
Yeah.
That they could all be very annoying. I live in Alabama. Trust me. I know about one of them in particular. But LSU, et cetera, they could all be that way. Now you had Texas and Oklahoma, 2 crazy fan bases. These people don't like each other. From going back and looking at my podcast, I think one of the reasons that some of the fans on my site would rather go. They just hate the SEC fans.
Yeah,
they do. Clemson's brand is crazy because they have such a rich history, but they did what Florida is doing now. It is hard to screw up Florida, but the Gators are doing a good job of that right now. It is really hard. Clemson screwed it up for a long time too, but their fan base is nuts. I knew they would come back eventually, but that's interesting. It's Virginia Tech should never be consistently better than Clemson, by the way, but they were for a while.
They were, yeah.
It's so wild. Great stat, by the way, on Bowling Green. Here's my take. Florida State, I don't buy any of the public stuff that I'd highly doubt you do either, any AD says, oh, we're not interested in Florida State. Right. If anybody buys for a second that the Big Ten and the SEC is not at least interested, there's some swampland in South Alabama that I have available. It is for you. So, look, this is pretty simple. It depends on the price tag. There's that word again, money. And 2, based on the stuff we're hearing, NC State, Louisville, it's about partnering to make it work. Give you an example. When the ACC they continuously tried to court Notre Dame, do you think it's coincidence they took Stanford? Do you know the backstory on that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, 100%.
They want Notre Dame. Notre Dame wants Stanford because they play them every year. They want to count it as a conference game if they ever did it. If they would have said we want Cal Poly, I know ACC fans don't like that. It's just the way it is. That brand is different. Cal Poly would have been in the ACC. So if Florida State could take Clemson, like especially if they could take Carolina, because the Big Ten wants the basketball.
Yep.
Different deal. Who are you going to put with it? It is a package. So my curiosity with you, I think the Big 12 is as good, if not better, basketball league as there is. Would you say Carolina or Clemson is the bigger draw if you're the Big Ten? I say Carolina because of the hoops. They're good at football, but I go Carolina because of hoops.
Yeah, if you look at EADA numbers in the last 2 decades, the school that is going to consistently make more money is actually North Carolina. And they have the AAU status to back it up. It's a nerd school. I went there. This has nothing to do with realignment. I went there 2 months ago. The bar scene sucked. There was nobody just looking around. It's a bunch of nerds. It's like, what are we doing here, guys? Can we just have a little fun and loosen up for a second? And I thought, this is Big Ten country. This is exactly what that conference is looking for, is the nerd school that is good at basketball because Michael Jordan, Dean Smith, to Roy Williams. They have the pedigree. 10 years of bad basketball at North Carolina. They still have the Jordan brand. Michael Jordan still went there and is still pouring money into that university and their athletic department. Clemson, who's their big donor alum? Who's their big athlete? We always know that Clemson's going to have a deal with Nike. No, we don't. Oh, they always got Adidas in their back. That's not really how North Carolina is built in. Win or lose, they are built in for the rest of time. They can suck, but still afford to suck. Clemson can't afford to suck. Long term, the Big Ten wants a North Carolina or even a Virginia over a Clemson.
Basketball school.
And that's how much they value both basketball and the nerd aspect, education.
Yeah, Virginia, for those who don't know, you could make the argument based on academics, is the best public institution in the country. It's in the conversation. Carolina's on that quasi level as well. And yes, I grew up in Big Ten country. That matters a lot to them. It's an arrogant discussion, one that I have no interest in, but that's the other point beyond basketball. Before we get ready to wrap up here in a few minutes, here's my question to you. If you're Louisville, NC State, one of the quote unquote, and I know they won't like this term, but it's just true for football, one of the tier 2 teams in the ACC, who are you trying to? North Carolina is obvious. I think they're number one because of basketball and the Jordan brand. Right. You stole my line. I 100% agree. Who would you try to align yourself with? Would it be Florida State or Miami, and why? Because the Big Ten, like if you're trying to get into the Big Ten, they want to be in Florida. Which one do you think is more valuable? I went back and forth on this.
Well, I think from a Big Ten standpoint, you certainly want Florida State. And from the standpoint of the SEC, if you had to pick between the Florida State and Miami, the Big 12, I think the Big 12 is in a much better spot to land in Miami because Florida State's shooting for the moon. Shoot for the moon, Florida State, land in the stars, Miami. Reason being, Miami fan base, they don't show up for a damn thing. There's nothing. Coral Gables does not give you a football culture. Let's go back pre-Howard Schnellenberger when they really, really sucked. Your gifted, legendary Hall of Fame coaches in Jimmy Johnson or Howard Schnellenberger who win at the highest levels, and the gap years there aren't good. It's not a fruitful long-term football program. And you could oh, yes, it is. I point to the last 2 decades. This is a school that's kind of Clemson reversed, right? Again, 15 years ago, give me Miami. 20 years ago, Miami is head over heels better than Clemson in every expansion conversation. But what they did is they were bad for 20 years in a state that has 2 powers like Florida and Florida State. And in that area, you can't do it. You can't afford to suck for that long. Miami has, and it's put them way behind.
The only thing that I even put them in the conversation for is the market. Yeah, I spent a lot of time down there. The oodles of money will help them because the advertising dollars, even for what we do, any sites I've dealt with that have money, the money's higher because there's just so many rich people. Otherwise, everything Drake just said is 1,000,000% true. We're going to wrap up the show here in just a second, talking about not just Florida State, Big 12, but I'm curious about a few takes with what he thinks about the Big 12 this year and why teams, Florida State or otherwise, should be interested in joining. You can pick whatever school you want, but I mean, that's your turf. I'm going to let you kind of have it. That's next here on the crossover between Locked On Big 12 and Seminoles. All right, man. You're the Big 12 guy. What is the advantage for any team that I mentioned, NC State, whoever, joining the Big 12? Floor is yours.
Long term, it's security, knowing that your conference is not going to fall apart. If I asked you who's in a better spot right now, the ACC or the Big 12, it's certainly the Big 12. Reason being is the top two brands in the ACC are jumping ship in Florida State and Clemson. I don't see a way that those two schools at this point stay. And maybe the biggest problem, I had a guest recently on my podcast who said this, was that when Florida State said, hey, we're suing the ACC's they didn't respond with, hey, whoa, let's work this out together. It was, all right, we're suing you back. Same thing with Clemson. The Florida Attorney General gets involved. And at this point, they've gone back and forth too much to come to a mutual agreement at any juncture between those two entities. So with those two schools gone, you look at a Louisville and you say, hey, Louisville, now ESPN, who can X that contract in 2027. By February of 2025, ESPN has to decide what they're going to do long-term with the ACC's contract. And it's not going to be good when the top two schools in that league have left. And who is there to backfill with? The Pac-12 has already been taken. The USFs of the world exist, but UCF's already in the Big 12, and that's a brand that could blow up soon, and that's why they're in the Big 12 instead of USF. And Memphis is there, but they don't cover for a Florida State or a Clemson. ESPN is going to drop that contract, and when they do, Louisville, who is in the top 25 in revenue nationally the last 2 decades, is going to look around and say, hey, when we suck at basketball, we're still damn good at the money part of basketball. When we're good at football, we bring in some of the best revenue of anybody in this conference. We can't sit here and make $5-10 million less than every Big 12 school. We're gonna go join those guys and understand we have security in money and security in existence of conference. And for Virginia Tech, for Miami, it's going to stay the same. If Miami's not picked up by the Big 10, and they certainly won't be by the SEC, they're going to effectively fall to the Big 12. And that doesn't, at this point where we sit in college football as of 2024, Utah and Miami aren't that far off from each other. And if they played on the gridiron tomorrow, it's a bloodbath. People say Miami's going to be good this year. Maybe they are, but you have certain Big 12 programs that have become established. And when you establish those, it makes Miami look a lot less established based on their last 2 decades. So with that said, if you're Miami, if you're Louisville, Virginia Tech, if you're NC State, if you're Pitt, the best part about the Big 12 is that it's going to exist and you're going to make more money there than you would in the ACC.
Unfortunately, for the schools you just mentioned, I agree, because the Big 12 is the last thing standing. Pittsburgh is not getting a phone call from Sankey.
Nope.
You know what I mean? So Miami will never get that phone call because the coaches would put pitchforks up and go to his house because they don't want Miami to have the SEC logo and recruit Miami. Because, it would be a monopoly.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, they got to go somewhere. And again, I think it's the Big 12. I don't know how much money difference there is, and that's still the problem.
Yep.
You mentioned early on, and accurately, that it's give or take like 20 million, 30 million, or whatever it is a year difference. And I'm sure there's some variables with that, with bowl money and stuff, but It's a lot. It's a lot for Florida State, Miami, and all these schools. And again, I'm not picking on them. I understand why you need them in the league. Florida State, Miami, Clemson, North Carolina, NC State, they can't make the same money that Boston College and Virginia do. Like the football, they just can't. It's a different animal. Football is different than anything because it's so expensive to run, especially now that they're going to the 105 possible scholar. I don't even know how that's going to work yet. I think that's a disaster. I think the ACC is going to implode by 28. What say you? Is that – what do you – because like 26, 27, somebody's, I'm assuming, going to get out. Maybe I'm wrong, but at least one of Florida State and Clemson, I don't know which one will break through. What do you think?
Yeah, Florida State and Clemson, I believe, will be gone by the time February 2025 hits. We will know if those two schools at least intend to stay, and the answer is as we talked about, very, very likely no.
1% maybe.
Right. At which point, Louisville learns that ESPN is going to either cancel its contract altogether past 2027 or reduce the contract to the point where it's no longer viable. That's the word I keep using, is viable. And if Louisville hears, hey, we're going to make $10 million less than the Big 12, or we could go to the Big 12 and make $35 million a year or whatever those schools are making at the time, they're obviously going to make that jump. Now, is the Big 12 conference still going to make 15, 20 million less than the SEC and the Big 10? Of course. However, at that point, the ACC is going to lose 5, 6, 7, 8 schools. And their best chance is to stay at 8 or more to keep the conference alive, quote, alive. Crack a deal with Amazon or Apple TV or the CW, bring in USF and Memphis and build the American Conference light. Just the ACC slapped on, that brand slapped on the American Conference. And that when Georgia Tech or Syracuse or Wake Forest are playing Memphis and USF, that's a conference that's not going to be around for very long.
That's kind of what I see too. And schools like Virginia, I'm sure they have more basketball interest. They got a better chance. I think they're going to get scooped up and go to the Big Ten. I think they're happy in general. I mean, they could always do a basketball thing, but those schools, they're going to be done with the ACC. It's going to fold. And I agree. I hate them, but you're going to see some corporate sponsor maybe for a short term. There might be a year or two before they join the league. We could get some weird league for a year or two that these teams try to form. There's all kinds of possibilities.
Yep.
So, well, Jake, thank you very much for taking the time to join tonight. I truly appreciate. I don't know what's going to happen, and I just kind of wanted to let people know. I mean, you're in the know with what's going on there. Again, thank you very much. I hope everybody enjoyed. But for the record, I'm not saying that Florida State is joining the Big 12. For all the people that hate anything in Big 12, but it is what it is. They control things even if Florida State doesn't negotiate with them, is why I had Drake on tonight. So thanks once again. Everybody have a good night. Appreciate you all being here.